This is the Retro XP Podcast, a podcast dedicated to retro video games from the first and second gen with the Odyssey and the Atari 2600, all the way up to Gen 7 with the Xbox 360 and the PS3. Today's episode, I'll be honoring a Patreon subscriber bonus perk of suggesting a podcast episode topic, and for today, we'll be talking about the Valve Corporation, or Valve Software, however you call them, and how it went from a video game developer to running the premier storefront for PC gaming and also a hardware manufacturer. The lore will be quite massive in this episode, so buckle up and let's get started. Retro XP is part of the Hair of the Dogcast network, so be sure to check out patreon.com/Hair of the Dogcast to check out every show the network has and get access to the exclusive community Discord. There is a 30-day free trial available if you want to try it out. Otherwise, you can follow me on X, Threads, and Instagram, and YouTube at RetroX Podcast. Whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on, be sure to follow and enable notifications so you can find out when I drop a new episode, which should be every week. So, to kick things off with the topic, big shout out to Patreon Cute Bomb subscriber and Discord community member Phil_E for the topic idea, and one that's an important piece of retro history and how it will continue to make history. Valve Software, or Valve Corporation, however you want to call it, got its humble beginnings in 1996 by the former Microsoft employees Gabe Newell and Mike Harrington. Newell had spent the prior 13 years at Microsoft developing Windows, which include the Windows 95 port of Doom from id Software. So that's where we're pretty much going to start with Gabe Newell and Mike Harrington, but a little bit of backstory on Gabe Newell himself, who still to this day is the main guy at Valve. He was born November 3rd, 1962 in Colorado, attended Davis Senior High School in Davis, California. He began computer programming in high school at a time when programming was not an established career path, and imagined he would become a doctor, actually. Keep in mind, this was the late 70s and early 80s, so home computing was almost non-existent at this time. It was mostly reserved for people that actually had a lot of money. But, of course, at this time, it was primed to boom as well. So most of the guys and girls at this time were just self-taught, learned on the job. He worked as a paperboy and later a telegram messenger for Western Union. Now, if you wanted to send messages across the wire and you didn't have access to long-distance phones, you had to send a telegram. Now, I know most of my audience, I would imagine, knows what a telegram is and knows what Western Union is, but for, if there's any young kids out there, we had to send telegrams. We couldn't just send a text or an email or anything, so... In 1980, Newell enrolled at Harvard University to study programming. While at Harvard, Newell visited his brother at Microsoft, which was not yet a major software developer at this time. What we know as Microsoft now, they were, small time at this time. At the suggestion of the Microsoft executive Steve Ballmer, he dropped out of Harvard and began working at Microsoft. Newell said himself that Microsoft was the best place in the world to learn to program at the time. They were kind of doing... they were renegades, they were rebels. They were like, let's try things out. Let's try to see what we can do with all this kind of increasing technology that we had. So, they were daring at the time. So, like I mentioned earlier, Newell spent 13 years at Microsoft as a programmer and a technical executive and produced the first 3 releases of the Windows operating system. Windows 1.0 in 1985, Windows 2.0 in 87, and Windows 3.0 in 1990. I think 2 years later, we got the infamous Windows 3.1, which basically skyrocketed Microsoft Windows to be kind of the premier operating system at the time, and even now to this day, unfortunately. Unless you're if you're a Linux guy, you probably don't like Windows. Anyway, in late 1995, Doom, a 1993 first-person shooter game developed by id Software, you might have heard of it, was estimated to be installed on more computers worldwide than Microsoft's new upcoming operating system, Windows 95, which I would agree with this. At this time, everybody that had a computer, everybody had Doom. Newell commented on this in a way past interview, saying, quote, "It didn't even distribute through retail. It distributed through bulletin boards and other pre-internet mechanisms. To me, that was a lightning bolt. Microsoft was hiring 500 people sales teams, and the entire company I did was 12 people. Yet it had created the most widely distributed software in the world. There was a sea change coming." And at Microsoft, Newell led the development on a port of Doom for Windows 95, which is credited with helping make Windows a viable gaming platform. At the same time, one of his buddies, Michael Abrash, was working for Microsoft at the time, working on graphics and assembly code for Windows NT 3.1. At this time, when he was doing this, id Software picked him up, and he became one of the lead designers for Quake. I would say he was the main designer for Quake. After Quake came out, he actually went back to return to Microsoft to work on natural language research, and then moved to the Xbox team and worked there until 2001. Now, why this is important to mention is that Michael's path into video game development was pretty influential to Gabe Newell's ultimate departure from Microsoft. Abrash, up until leaving Microsoft to id Software, he developed quite a few games in his past. A clone of Space Invaders called Space Strike in 1982, Cosmic Crusader at that same year, and then the game Big Top in 1983. Those last two games were published by Funtastic. Space Strike was published by Datamost. I've never played any of these games. I want to say Cosmic Crusader sounds familiar, but I obviously had never played these games. I was born in 81, so Abrash will be an important figure later in this episode, so we'll put a pin in this for now. Oddly enough, though, Gabe Newell had the option of retiring from Microsoft at this point in the mid-90s. He had an option to... Microsoft had this thing where they wanted to give people kind of like a paid leave. And let me explain what they were offering. They were basically going to be giving developers and tech people the option to go on a sabbatical, like maybe 2-3 months, completely paid. Now, granted, I don't think they were offering this to everybody, but they were offering it to a lot of big people. They offered it to two other people that I'll be talking about, Mike and Monica Harrington. But so it's an interesting concept to have a company be like, "Hey, you want to like take a 2-3 month sabbatical? We'll pay you." Like, duh, I'll take it. You just don't hear about that anymore. But so like I said, Gabe Newell had this option of kind of, retiring or maybe taking this leave in the mid-90s. But instead, at this time, he and another employee of Microsoft, Mike Harrington, had just left Microsoft to found the video game company Valve on August 24th, 1996 in Kirkland, Washington. This was 5 miles from the Microsoft campus in Redmond, Washington. Another fun fact, this date, August 24th, was Newell's wedding day. Unfortunately, right now, they're divorced with 2 kids, though. But Newell opted to found Valve instead of retiring, as he felt working with other really smart, motivated, socially oriented people to create product that would affect millions of other people would be more fun. And I would say, I think this kind of paid off for him. Newell did not want a company name that suggested testosterone-gorged muscles in the extreme of anything. I mean, at the time, that's what the edgy kind of like late 90s was, is like, man, that was a time to be alive. Some other names besides Valve were floated around: Holobox, Fruit Fly Ensemble, and Rhinoscar. Fruit Fly Ensemble would have been an interesting name. I'm glad I'm in this timeline where it's called Valve, but there's another timeline out there where Fruit Fly Ensemble created Steam. Anyway, Valve's first game, if you don't know, was Half-Life, first-person shooter with elements of action and horror and kind of like a Orwellian type of story, and was completely self-funded. The game was developed using the Quake engine at the time. They borrowed it from id Software. Valve had modified this engine into making it their own engine, which was called the Gold Source engine. It's spelled Gold SRC, but SRC stands for Source. Valve had a hell of a time finding a publisher for Half-Life at this time, and they even went to Microsoft, and Microsoft said, "No, we're not interested in games right now at this point." Sierra Online took a chance of a lifetime, though, of course, by giving them a publishing deal. Half-Life was released in November of 1998 and was a critical and commercial success. With its realism, scripted sequences, seamless narrative, I mean, it was a big story at the time. We had first-person shooters that would just move to objective A, shoot everybody on the way. This one had a story. This one had narrative. And of course, as we all know now, it had a lasting influence. I would say that first-person shooters were forever changed after this game's release. Valve enlisted Gearbox Software to develop 3 expansions for Half-Life. If you know Gearbox Software, they're the developer that is very well known for creating the Borderlands franchise. They are also responsible for making Duke Nukem Forever, so you can blame them for ruining the Duke Nukem game. So the 3 expansions that they made were Opposing Force in 1999, Blue Shift, and Decay in 2001. Before this, in 1998, Valve had acquired TF Software, a group that had made the popular Team Fortress mod for Quake, and remade it for Gold Source as Team Fortress Classic in 1999. Valve had released the software development kit for the Gold Source engine, which facilitated numerous user-created mods that was pretty popular with a lot of people. We got a lot of really cool Half-Life mods as a result of this, some that actually went on to become bigger than they would have anticipated. They acquired the developers of one very popular mod, Counter-Strike, to create a standalone Counter-Strike game in 1999. So Counter-Strike was initially a mod for Half-Life. And obviously now we're reaping the benefits of it. The Counter-Strike 2 is so big right now. With the success of Valve Software because of Half-Life and its many expansions, Harrington decided, it's a good time for me to dip out, I guess, right when we're on the cusp of greatness. He decides to dip out. He sold his stake in Valve to Newell in 2000, pretty much leaving Gabe as the main guy. Of course, after the success of Half-Life, Valve got to work on Half-Life 2 right away. And basically, he gave Valve no deadline, unlimited budget, use as much, whatever it costs, we're going to do it. And they developed a new game engine called the Source engine, which I think they still have used pretty much routinely for years and years and years after that. During this time, however, Valve was in actually quite the legal battle over the name Half-Life and the franchise and the IP and everything. The publishing agreement with Sierra Online and Valve meant that Sierra actually owned the Half-Life intellectual property and held exclusive publishing rights to future Valve games. And when you think about it, it sounded like a real bad deal. But then again, Valve just wanted to get their game out there. They were young kids, they were young at the time. They were impressionable. They were like, holy crap, this publishing company wants to give us money for this game. It's one of those things like, I don't want to speculate, but they were probably like super excited to nail the publisher after getting rejected by so many others that they were just willing to take any deal at this point. So Monica Harrington, who was she was guiding the marketing and business development efforts of Valve during this time, and also was Mike Harrington's wife, talked about their contract with Sierra. And she talked about this in the Game Developers Conference literally last year in 2025. And she commented saying, there were a few things I didn't know, in which she was referring to the terms of that contract until she read it sometime later after Half-Life shipped. And funny enough, Monica at this time was working at Microsoft, and she was a pretty big dog up there. She was honored as an award for one of the top market makers at the time. She was poised actually to take that paid leave of absence from Microsoft for a few months. I think she had plans on vacationing and maybe doing some things around the house. But Mike, her husband, also took this leave option from Microsoft and convinced her that going all in with Valve was a better option. Yeesh. So Monica wasn't involved in a negotiating process with Sierra at the time. It was actually working both with Microsoft and Valve. And with Valve, she was head of games marketing. So she was working there kind of part-time, just helping her husband out and her husband and her best friend while she was still, working with Microsoft. So she wrote a blog post last year kind of detailing it a little bit more. And in this blog post, she had said, quote, when I returned to Microsoft, I went directly to the head of games and to the vice president of our division to say that my husband and Gabe Newell were starting a games business and that I would be helping them and that I'd be open to any changes Microsoft might want to make in terms of my role as a result. Both Ed Freeze and my managers were friendly and reassuring. At the time, there were literally hundreds of games published each year that just vanished into the ether. Valve was a tiny player, and I'm sure from Ed's and everyone else's perspective, likely to remain so. Man, if they had had a crystal ball at this time, this would have been Microsoft's opportunity if they had actually helped Valve out. But I mean, hindsight's 2020, I guess. She goes on to further say, because of my role at Microsoft, I decided not to get involved in the contract negotiations. It was up to Mike and Gabe to figure that out with Sierra. At the time, standard industry practice for an unproven game company was for an upfront advance against royalties with additional royalties due only if the game was successful. And honestly, her whole blog posts on the early days of Valve is just really intriguing. And they were so close, so many times, to failing in their endeavors to bring Half-Life to the masses, even Half-Life 2. So I'll link her whole story and her whole blog post in the description of this episode. It's really quite fascinating. I could read the whole thing, but I mean, we'd be here forever. So she went on about the contract, saying all that she never knew. Chief among them, she says, quote, was that Sierra had the option for 2 more games, essentially under the same terms. And this is despite the fact that we had produced a monster hit. So under this scenario, Valve would fund all but $1 million of the cost of developing a game, and Sierra would retain all the IP rights and pay about 15%. It felt insane, and I would agree with her. 15%? That's nuts. At this time, Valve was at a crossroads. They either were going to fight for the rights to Half-Life or move on to something else entirely. Monica continued on to say, with Gabe's okay, I met with Valve's attorney to plan out a strategy for regaining the IP for Half-Life and all future games. And essentially, my bargaining position was that Valve and Sierra would either rework that contract, or Gabe and Mike and the team would pivot to something else entirely, and Valve would never ship another game ever. It wasn't an idle threat. We weren't going to take on all the risk to make other people rich, which, I mean, in that sense, I would agree with them all. Why would you bust your butt for someone else to just make 90% of the money? At the time, also, Harrington knew that Gabe had other ideas in mind for what Valve could do besides game development, and I think we all know what that's going to be leading up to. So this all was happening at the time they were developing Half-Life 2. So Valve had sued Sierra Online and its holding company Vivendi to get the rights back for Half-Life and to at least get a little bit of their independence. Not only developing a bigger game than their previous one, but also they were doing backwork development on the PC storefront Steam. Valve literally almost went bankrupt in their fight against Vivendi, trying to do 3 things at once. Vivendi, though, were being real pricks during this process and were writing up legal documents related to the case in Korean, with hope in winning a war of attrition against Valve by bogging them down with trying to decipher what was in those documents by hiring, people to decipher or people to, read Korean and stuff. So they needed translators and stuff. But, it's kind of a prick move by their part. So all their legal documents were in Korean, all of them. So interesting stroke of luck. Valve's legal department had an ace in the hole, a summer intern by the name of Andrew, and that's all we know. Andrew was a native Korean speaker and a Korean language studies major at UCLA. So after combing through thousands of documents that Vivendi had, the intern found not quite literal, I should say. The intern found a needle in the haystack, a single paper that proved Vivendi was actually destroying evidence relating to the case. This one revelation was enough to turn the case in Valve's favor, ultimately winning them the lawsuit, securing Valve the rights to Half-Life and Counter-Strike franchises, reimbursing their legal costs, and yes, terminating Vivendi's agreement with them. In the end, Valve took over distributing the games itself, which ultimately led to Steam evolving from a small software client to pretty much the largest digital distribution platform and storefront for PC games. A development many believe to be the core reason the modern PC gaming industry even exists. No one knows who or where Andrew is right now, but by God, man, do gamers all over the world thank you for your service. And without his find, who knows what the video game space would be like right now? It'd probably be, fully down. This was like I said, I think this was Microsoft's time that they could have gotten into the game space had they had a little bit of foresight that video games would be as big as they are now. And I don't think anybody knew at the time. You had like small guys out here that were, passionate about the games industry that just wanted to get their games out there. They wanted to make good games. They wanted to make fun games. And, Gabe had the foresight to think, you know, what if we create a platform where people can just buy games from? So we'll talk about that later, of course. So in the end, Half-Life 2 ended up being released in 2004, and the PC video game storefront client Steam released the previous year, September 2003. It was also during this year that Valve had reincorporated itself as Valve Corporation and moved to Bellevue, Washington. Things were really kicking off for Valve and would only get better from here. Valve essentially became its own publisher within Steam and also became a third-party publisher. Valve Corporation also poised itself as a, quote, flat organization, which means that there are very few levels of management between staff and executives. And basically what that means, kind of like a dumbed-down version, is that staff could literally move freely between teams without needing management approval. And this also gave more freedoms for people to work on projects without strict deadlines and oversight. So if you're, if you're a programmer and you stand up one day and you say, I want to go work on the concept artist team, or like, you know what, I'm working on Half-Life 2, but we're also working on another game down the hall. I want to go work on that game. Nobody could tell you no. You could just stand up and be like, hey, I'm going to go over to that team. And they just basically allowed you to do it. In a sense, teams worked without bosses. This is a novel idea in theory, but there are caveats to it. And Newell has admitted that it had issues with failing to catch bad decisions early on due to lack of these internal controls and lack of managers that would kind of hold people accountable, or at least checking people's work. Thus far, though, it's worked for Valve. It's still going strong this way to this day. And I think it's working so far this way because most likely since when they started out as a corporation, the flat organization system was there from the start. So they adopted with it instead of having it being, one way versus then all of a sudden changing it to this flat organization. So I'm not a business guy, so I don't know. I can't say whether or not this is a good way to run a business. But I'm just a guy. I'm just a video game podcaster. That's it. So Half-Life 2, like I said, came out on Steam on November 16th, 2004. Sold 680,000 copies by August of 2006, which was good numbers at the time, especially for PC. It's no slouch. It did win 39 Game of the Year awards, and like its predecessor, has been cited as one of the most influential first-person shooter games and among the greatest games ever made. By 2011, after it was ported to home consoles and such, it had sold 12 million copies across literally all platforms. Steam was required to install Half-Life 2, which I actually, at the time when I wanted it for my PC, confused the hell out of me. Like, why do I have to install this program in order to play this game? I bought the physical copy of the disc in the past. I would just put the disc in, install the game, and then there you go. You're playing it. I don't have to download anything or log online to do anything else. And none of us knew that. A lot of us were kind of shocked. So we'll talk more about that a little bit later, though. So what's Gabe up to now? Well, on top of being one of the 100 most wealthiest people in the United States with a network of 3.9 billion, of course, this was as of 2021, so this number is probably bigger in 2026 now. He also co-founded the neuroscience company Starfish Neuroscience to develop neural interfaces. Crazy. He is also the owner of the marine research organization Inkfish, and which this company owns several ships and submarines. In August of 2025, just last year, Newell acquired the privately owned yacht manufacturer Oceanco. It has two super yachts in his name, one being named the Leviathan. That was $500 million, and it is 111 meters long. That is literally the size of a football field, probably literally bigger than a football field. So I would say he's pretty much done well for himself, and he's continually doing well right now. Okay, so to this day, like I said, he's still running Valve, and everything's going well for Valve right now. So let's move on to Steam, which, like I said, made its beta debut in 2003. The idea behind Steam, with what they were thinking, was Valve was looking for a better way to update its published games, as providing downloadable patches for multiplayer games resulted in most users disconnecting for several days until they had installed the patch. They decided to create a platform that would update games automatically. and implement stronger anti-piracy and anti-cheat measures. They approached several companies, including Microsoft, Yahoo, and Real Networks, to build a client within these features, but of course they all rejected them. Yet again, another missed opportunity. So Half-Life 2 was the first high-profile game to be released for Steam, and unfortunately for purchasers of the physical edition, myself included, you were required to have an internet connection because you needed Steam, the client, to play this game. And I'll say this was not met well by the gamers back in the day. And Valve had an official stance on this. Their stance was, quote, all versions require an internet connection upon installation. This is for authentication, anti-piracy purposes. Once this has been completed, the owner of either the retail or the Steam version can play Half-Life 2 single player in offline mode. The onslaught of purchasers of Half-Life 2, of course, crashed the servers so many times that many who were trying to download and or install the game just couldn't, even the physical disc version. While this lasted a few days, the lasting effects were quite palpable, especially for people who were waiting years for a sequel. Keep in mind, this was like 5 years at this point. So imagine at this time when this was before, when you fire up a Call of Duty game right now, or, a lot of games, even single player campaigns, it's like you have to be connected online. Okay, fine. That's like, for us, it's par for the course now. It's like, well, whatever. That's just how the world is now. At this time, you put a physical disc in your computer or your system, it's supposed to run. It's supposed to run. You're not required to download anything. You weren't required to install something. You weren't required to even connect to the internet. You were just supposed to put the disc in your system and go. So this was brand new for us. I would say this is probably the first time when like a lot of us were like, we got to connect to the internet for games now. Of course, we didn't know where, games would lead to at this time, but here we are now, 30 years later almost. Steam's since become a more reliable service, of course, and improvements kept coming. In 2005, third-party developers were contracted to release games on Steam, such as Ragdoll Kung Fu and Darwinia, to name two. I don't know what those games are, but those were games. In my research of multiple sources, Valve was required to be the publisher for these games since they had sole access to Steam's database and engine. But with the introduction of the Steamworks software development kit in May of 2008, anyone could integrate Steam into their game without Valve's direct involvement. So you could self-publish into Steam without Valve needing to sponsor or publish you or anything like that. So the Steam client includes a digital storefront called the Steam Store, through which users can just purchase games. This is its own downloadable software. You could go through a browser, but this is its own software. Once the game is bought, a software license is permanently attached to the user's Steam account, allowing them to download the software on any compatible device or computer. Valve provides developers the ability to create storefront pages to help generate interest in the game ahead of release. So you could release it, you could create a storefront page, gets people to come in, you could see pictures, you could see trailers, you could see descriptions of it, you could wish list it, all this stuff. This is also... This storefront is really nice because this is also necessary to fix a release date that functions into Valve's build review, which was a free service performed by Valve about a week before the release date to make sure the game's launch is trouble-free. Because Valve does not want to dish out a broken game. With Steam, Valve wanted to make digital rights management, DRM, obsolete, as games released on Steam had traditional anti-piracy measures, including the assignment and distribution of product keys. So if you bought a game and you would get a card, you would get a 16-digit code or something like that you would put in, and then you could just download it straight from Steam from there. Now you'll remember I talked about DRM in my past episode about good old games. So I'm not going to get into kind of the caveats of DRM, but if you want to know more, go back, listen to that episode where I talk about good old games, because DRM is very important for them. With an update to the Steamworks SDK in March of 2009, Valve added Custom Executable Generation, CEG, which creates unique encrypted copy of the game's executable files for the given user, which allows them to install it multiple times and on multiple devices and make backup codes of their software. You don't have access to the entire files like you would if you bought the game from Good Old Games. You have to play the game through Steam. So you can't like play it independently without having, without Steam, so to speak. So once the software is downloaded and installed, the user must then authenticate through Steam to de-encrypt the executable files to play the game. Normally, this is done when connected to the internet, following the user's credential validation. But once they have logged into Steam once, a user can instruct Steam to launch in a specific offline mode to be able to play their games without a network connection. So you buy the game, you install it, requires a one-time check to make sure, hey, you play this game on your profile? Okay, you can. All right, cool. That's it. They're not going to have to like mandatorily require you to log online every time. And with this, there are still DRMs riddled in games on Steam, tons, which are options publishers can put into their games. So this isn't Valve saying every game has to have a DRM. This is up to the publishers. So up until 2012, though, Valve handpicked games to be included onto the Steam service, which limited these to games that either had a major developer supporting them or even smaller studios with proven track records. Since then, Valve has sought ways to enable more games to be offered through Steam while pulling away from manually improving games, short of validating a game that runs on the platforms the publisher has indicated, like I talked about earlier, that weak process. So this allowed basically independent developers, just a guy or a girl working in their basement making a game on their own without a publisher, without, experience, you could put your game out there, which is cool. I think this has been hugely important for the indie game space. We've seen some great indie games from single developers, unproven developers, to have come out to be really big games at this time. In August 2011, Valve said Steam's revenue estimated to be $1 billion in 2010, the previous year. And Gabe Newell said that the company was tremendously profitable. I would agree with that. Being more profitable per employee than companies like Google or Apple at this time. Valve had reported that there were 125 million active accounts on Steam by the end of 2015. By August of 2017, the company had reported that there were 27 million new active accounts since January of 2016, bringing the total number of active users to at least 150 million. So in October 2025 of last year, Steam reached a new all-time concurrent user peak of 41.6 million, surpassing its previous record by over 1 million. Concurrent user peak meaning there were 41.6 million people logged on to play Steam at one given time. And this surge was attributed largely to the release of Battlefield 6 last year. So good on them. Analysis by Alinea Analytics estimated that in the first 11 months of 2025, Steam had brought in $16.3 billion in revenue. That's a lot of money for Steam to get. Steam obviously was, at the time, 2010, was estimated to have the largest share of the PC digital distribution market. In 2013, sales via the Steam catalog were estimated to be between 50 and 75% of the total PC gaming market. Between 2010 and 13, with an increase in retail copies of major game publishers integrating or requiring Steam, retailers and journalists refer to the service as a monopoly, which they claimed can be detrimental to the industry, and that sector competition would yield positive results for consumers. Competition is good for the overall business, and good for customers. In that same vein, I couldn't find current numbers, but there are plenty of other platforms available for publishers. So you got big publishers like EA, Ubisoft, Microsoft, and Epic Games, which have their own storefronts and also require their own launch clients. You can, Ubisoft has their storefront where you can, install their, storefront. You can buy games straight from them and without any sort of external, other hardware that you have to get. And then you can play the game straight from that software. However, nowadays, many of their games are actually still available to purchase on Steam. Some of them tried to, I think Ubisoft in particular, were like, we don't want our games to be on Steam, so we're going to put them out exclusively to our platform, our, client. And I want to say they pivoted 2 years later. EA tried to do that same thing too. Microsoft as well too. I think they tried to do that, but it's just Steam had such a big platform and big footprint in the PC gaming space that it was hard to ignore. You can't fight against Steam. And I think even Amazon tried to do that with Luna. and that did not work for them. Steam, I think, was the first to hit the market. It was the first to hit it big, and all the small time players were like, well, small by comparison, wanted to come in and get a slice of that pie, and just couldn't touch Valve, couldn't touch Steam. So, like I said, but of course, if you still buy a game, like say you buy an EA game, Electronic Arts game on Steam, you still have to download their own client in order to play the game. So it's kind of annoying that you buy an EA game on Steam, but you have to still download their client, to play the game. So it's like you have to launch 2 programs just to play a game. It's kind of annoying. What's also annoying for some is that in order to sell your game on Steam, if you're a developer, Valve takes a 30% cut of your revenue. So if you sell a game on Steam for $60, Valve takes $18 of it. If you're an independent developer, this can cut pretty deep. A 2025 report by Gamalytic found that of the approximately 13,000 games that were released on Steam from January to October of 2025, only 8% were estimated to have made revenues over $100,000, while 40% had failed to make more than $100, which $100 is the cost of applying to publish a game on Steam. 40% of the games on Steam right now have made no money. That's crazy. That is crazy. Why? It's just dumbfounding to, like, when I researched that and I read that, I was like, I knew it was bad. I knew it was bad because it's like the whole 80-20 rule. 20% of the companies out there make 80% of the profit, 80% of the revenue. So it's tough for little guys out there to make a difference. You have to be really something special to make an impact, and the odds are not in your favor. According to the numbers, 40% of games on Steam fail to make more than $100. Probably enough to recoup costs, but you want to get into the business to make a little bit of money, right? I don't know. It's crazy. In this case, Steam has become a necessary evil in our industry. And while many have tried to take them to court and file lawsuits over this model, they have either been dismissed or lost entirely. The 30% revenue share is pretty standard across the board, I would say. If you're publishing a game or if you're making a game that's published by EA or Ubisoft and they have their own client, you could probably get better benefits that way. But if you're an independent game developer that's not being published by any of the big dogs, well, you're kind of alone on an island. And Steam is, like I said, what the numbers were like last year around October, there was 41 million people logged on to Steam at one given time, which has been the most ever in history. So you can't deny that the place to go buy games and to play games is Steam. So it's kind of a necessary evil if you want to get your name out there. The really nice thing about it is that you have good forward marketing. People can find your stuff, but you got to be creative in that front. And I'm not speaking from experience, but I would imagine you got to be creative enough to, how do I want to market my game? When do I want to tease it for release? And how do I get people to put it on their wish list? Which the wish list option is such a nice thing to have, because once you hear about a game, I highly suggest you wish list it right away. I've missed so many games in the past because I've never, sometimes I would like write it in my phone or in my notes pad, like, hey, I want to make sure to check this game out when it comes out. So wish listing it kind of gives you updates. So developers can send updates to people who wish list their game to say like, hey, this game has a demo out right now, or hey, this game is in beta right now, or this game is in early access. Early access is a new thing that Steam is doing where new games come out and you can get early access to play an unfinished product of the game. You still have to pay the money, but you're almost becoming a game tester at this point. So, so what else has Valve done in this time besides making Half-Life 3, which I would argue is many people's most wished game every year? Half-Life 3 rumors. It's kind of sad at this point. After having taken 5 years to develop Half-Life 2, Valve had actually moved on to episodic development, which planned to release shorter games more frequently. So Half-Life 2 Episode 1, which was the first in a planned trilogy of episodic Half-Life 2 sequels. This was released in 2006. Episode 2 followed in 2007 along the multiplayer game Team Fortress 2 and the puzzle game Portal, developed from the studio project Narbacular drop. On October 2007 for Windows platforms and Xbox 360, we got one of the best values in video game history with the Orange Box, a game bundled with Half-Life 2, Episode 2, Team Fortress 2, and Portal. Portal is probably one of the most unique and amazing games I've ever played. If you haven't played it, I highly suggest you do. It's got some of the most unique puzzle-solving elements and one of the most, I don't know, just funniest character interactions. Portal and Portal 2. It's really worth it. It started out initially, I think, on PC as a short. A few levels, whatever, puzzle solving. You're using portals to get around and to solve room puzzles and stuff. And then the game ended. But with the introduction of the Orange Box, they had expanded it to be almost like a full game. So, Orange Box, like I said, one of the best values in gaming even to this day. In January 2008, Valve had announced the acquisition of Turtle Rock Studios, which was renamed Valve South. Turtle Rock developed Left 4 Dead and Left 4 Dead 2 while associated with Valve. Of course, Turtle Rock Studios spun out of Valve again in March 2010. They ended up making some other games that did not do so well, unfortunately. So in 2009, Valve had hired IceFrog, the developer of games like Defense of the Ancients, which was a Warcraft 3 mod. Basically, they led the development of Dota 2, which came out in 2013. If you know what Dota is, you know what Dota is. I'm not even going to begin to explain what Dota 2 is because I have no idea. I played it once, had no idea what was happening. Alongside Dota 2 in 2013, Valve had started the International, which is just called the International, an annual esports tournament for Dota 2 with a prize pool supported by Valve and funds from microtransactions from battle passes purchased by players. Valve had then released Portal 2 in April 2011. And, they made some more stuff later on, but this is a retro gaming podcast, so we can't talk really about everything. We'll stop at Dota 2. Well, we've also seen some hardware come from Valve, like the Steam controller, which came out in 2015. It's still available to purchase if you want, but I wouldn't personally recommend it. It feels really cheap. It feels so plasticky. It does something interesting with dual analog control sticks, making them track pads instead of sticks. But it wasn't received very well. It failed upon arrival. I want to say you could have bought this controller, I think, for $10 at some points. But PC gaming was primarily tied to mouse and keyboard. But as more gamers were getting added to using controllers, the PC needed a controller option, a good controller option. You could buy some really crappy aftermarket third-party controllers that just were crap. Or, Steam wanted to try their hand at, offering you something a little bit more meaningful. At this time, too, they created the Steam Link. This was a streaming device you could plug into your TV and stream Steam games. If your internet was beefy enough, of course. This also died on arrival, unfortunately. This really wasn't reliable enough, mostly since at this time, not a lot of us had good internet speeds at this time. There was no fiber internet. They did make a VR headset called the Valve Index. This came out in 2019. This was actually discontinued just last year, 2025, in favor of the upcoming Steam Frame, which is a wireless VR headset. Arguably one of Valve's biggest tech successes is the Steam Deck, which, like all of their tech, is only purchasable through their storefronts. So if you wanted to buy anything from Valve, you have to go to Steam to buy it, or you have to go to Valve's official website. It's wild. So you can't go into a Best Buy to buy the Steam Deck. You can't even buy it off of Amazon unless you bought it like weirdly secondhand or something like that. But I don't even know I never even looked actually if that was even possible. The Steam Deck is a handheld gaming device that's powered well enough to run most games that is available on the Steam platform, or any PC game really. You could download and run games on it with mixed results depending on the kind of quality you expect from any of your games, especially some AAA games. Some AAA games just don't run well at all, no matter how you adjust the settings. Despite that, it's been immensely popular, and it's even spawned other manufacturers to make their own PC handheld devices like Asus, Lenovo, and Logitech. So if you don't play newer games and are only interested in retro games, which I assume you have some interest in retro games, you're listening to my podcast, Steam has a lot of options for you. So I would recommend checking out Steam Curators. This would really be the first place I'd go to.
if you have a PC and you have Steam. And for a lot of retro games, you don't need a high functioning, high powered gaming PC to run retro games. You really don't. So don't need to spend thousands of dollars on a powerful PC to run these games. So Steam Curators, it's an often missed section of Steam. You could actually gloss over it and don't even know what it is. So you can follow users who curate lists based on your interests. So like if you're interested in a specific genre, curators can compile lists based on those interests. So like if you're interested in visual novels, if you're interested in first person shooters, if you're interested in, games from a certain era or games from a certain developer or publisher, like they could create lists based on like, hey, here is a lot of good visual novels that I curated that you can check out. So if you want to find curators, you go to Steam, open up Steam, click on recommendations, and it's up in the top. And then to the right, once you hover over recommendations, to the right, you should see, a little clickable icon that says Steam Curators. When you're in there, find the page Retro Games 80s and 90s, and 80s as in the number 80s, and 90s same thing. You'll find a list of over 350 games that are from this era and a little bit early 2000s. If you go there, you can kind of list everything by like top sellers or newly added. Some top sellers are Sonic Adventure 2, Half-Life 1 and 2, Fallout 1 and 2, the first two, Roller Coaster Tycoon, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, Shenmue, Quake, Doom, the Splinter Cell trilogy, a lot of the retro Star Wars games as well. And I mean, there's a ton more. There's, like I said, there's over 350 of them. And it all really kind of depends what's retro to you and what kind of sticks out for you. But also, I mean, try and search for a game if you're curious. I took a shot in the dark actually just recently. I used to, back when I was younger, like 12, I used to play a PC full motion video game called Spycraft. It was like you were a CIA agent and you were there was full motion videos and you had to like solve this international conspiracy and you had to like do puzzles and like decipher notes and stuff. It was really cool. And I was like, man, I really want to play that game again, but I just don't know how to find it. Like, I mean, I could try to emulate it, but sure as heck, when I searched for it in Steam, I found it. It was cool. Like, it was like $4. Like, it was crazy. Shoot your shot. You'd be surprised what you can find. If you follow this list, which has, like I said, has more than 80s and 90s games in it, it gets updated routinely. So, a lot of times they'll re-release games, they'll remaster games. Some things will get removed from the storefront. There's also collections on there too. You've heard me talk about games like Castlevania Collection, Mega Man Collections. So, I mean, all these games are on here too that have been kind of remastered and cleaned up to kind of run nicer on modern hardware. So, I mean, like I said, never know. So to cap things off, Valve has been, I would say, quite the force in video game history. From those humble beginnings to being the most dominant force in PC gaming. I mean, you can't deny Valve is just standing tall, very tall, over many developers, publishers, and even hardware manufacturers. They've had their hits and misses. I forgot what I didn't mention too is that the Steam Machine is coming out, which is going to be kind of like a home PC console. That it's basically going to be running Steam on a system that you can plug into your TV as opposed to just a PC or a Steam Deck. So that's going to be coming out this year too as well, along with another Steam controller, which is another interesting design. But I think a lot of people are liking this one better than the Steam controller from 10 years ago. So I mean, Steam is arguably the premier place to play PC games, and its dominance has pretty much made it unrivaled at this point. Although many of their business practices to this day are not friendly with independent developers, with, like I said, with that 30% revenue cut, most, if not all, other independent PC gaming clients have this same cut anyway. So damned if you do, right? So yeah, I hope you enjoy this retrospective into Valve and Steam, and thank you again for Patreon Cube Bomb supporter Phil E for the episode suggestion. Even I learned a ton researching this episode. If you're interested in becoming a Patreon member, if you become a Cube Bomb subscriber, which I'm not for sure off the top of my head how much it is a month, but you can actually suggest episodes. So if there is an episode topic you want me to discuss, consider becoming a Patreon subscriber, and I'll talk about it. So that about wraps it up in this episode. Be sure to follow me on my socials on X, Threads, and Instagram at RetroXPodcast, whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. Follow, enable notifications so you can find out when I drop a new episode every week. Episodes are also live on YouTube, and you can follow me there as well at RetroXPodcast. And I also want to thank Hair of the Dogcast Network for allowing me in their group of shows, and consider contributing to us, like I said, at patreon.com/Hair of the Dogcast, and join the community on Discord where you can get access to exclusive episodes every week. Thanks for listening.